Hello, welcome back. My name is Scott McGurn. I'm sure that we all feel terrible about what's going on in the world, and it's difficult to respond to it, especially making a video. People are going to say, oh, he's making a video because he's taking advantage of the fact that all those people died in New Zealand. Well, that's not it. I feel terrible about it. We all feel terrible about it. When I watch what's going on over there, and I think about what's going on all around the world every day, I can honestly say that I think the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, actually did a great job as far as demonstrating unity and compassion. She certainly did a better job, a much better job than all of the other world leaders who pretty much dropped the ball and made us all look bad. My point that I want to get to today is, why is it that nobody in the media, nobody, including Jacinda Ardern, got to the real key issue of what is it that is causing this? Okay, who is benefiting from all of this terrorism? What is the angle? What is the point, and how do we stop it? I want to deal with that subject today. What is it that makes one person want to kill another person? Okay? It's a terrible subject, but we see it all the time. What is it that makes somebody want to kill another person? Okay? Well, first of all, I'm going to present this in a way that maybe you haven't heard before. I've done a lot of speaking and some videos on the human ego and how it affects us as individuals, what it makes us do. I want to talk about how it affects the world, how collectively we see the toxification of the world through the simple and basic selfishness of individuals' financial interest collectively affecting a wider picture, okay? Now, let me start out by talking about the international system of banking, because essentially that's what it comes down to. Some people call that a conspiracy. Really, it isn't. You have wealthy people who put their money in the bank and they spend their lives managing that money. If you're a billionaire, you're spending all day managing that money. You manage it through the international banking cartel. It just means money goes into a bank and it's managed through the banking system, the stock market, you name it. All various investments are managed through that. That's how it works. If you think of water, okay, if you think of water flowing down a river, think of the banks of the river, okay? The banks of the river manage the water as it goes down, okay? The banks, the financial banks of the world manage the flow of money. All of it, okay? I had to do another video just on that, I think. But for now, it's all of it, all right? So a small number of people, say less than 1% of the population, has the vast, total control of finance. Money controls the world. So the international banking cartel, if you look at all of it combined, it has 100 times more influence than our elected leaders. This is just a fact of life. I'm not even saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying that's the way it works. And since people are fundamentally selfish through the ego, they want their investments to be successful, they want to make money. Okay, so let's look at cause and effect. Okay, now, first of all, in order to divide and conquer, whether you're in business or whether you're in politics, in order to divide and conquer, one needs to play the blame game, okay? Blaming somebody else, okay? We've talked about that before, I've talked about that before. One has to establish a villain who is so evil that he makes what you are doing, what we are doing, seem like an innocent, necessary, and even noble response to the other guy's evil, okay? Adolf Hitler blamed the Jews and the Gypsies. He told the German people, "You're better than everybody else. You don't make mistakes. All of the problems in Germany are the fault of the Jews and the Gypsies." He vilified them. He made a straw man out of them, blamed them for everything and get rid of them. Okay, this is how he came to power. He got people to believe that. He had a lot of control over the media. All right. If Donald Trump wants to build a wall because he hates poor people, he hates people with brown skin, he knows that his base feels the same way, he can't just build a giant statue to hatred. He'd look bad. For him to build this wall, this giant symbol of hatred, what he has to do is he has to vilify the people on the other side of the wall. Not women and children escaping Honduras and El Salvador because we deliberately destroyed their economies. Now that wouldn't fly. He has to describe them as hordes of rapists and murderers coming to get us, coming to take our jobs, rape our wives and children, murder us in our sleep. He won't mention the fact that an immigrant is half as likely to commit a crime as someone born in the United States. He has to vilify to justify what he does. Now, having said that, I want to talk briefly about Richard Nixon, because we need to go back in history. Richard Nixon had a Secretary of State named Henry Kissinger. All right, older people like myself will remember this very well. Henry Kissinger developed the idea of creating and using something called Islamic Radicalization. Well, nobody knew what that was. Muslims had been peaceful for hundreds of years. But Kissinger had the idea. He saw, and the bankers agreed, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is the enemy of the banking system. We have to destroy it, but we have to vilify it first, and we have to do something else. Islamic radicalization was used as a way of destabilizing, sowing dissent in what was then a mostly Muslim Soviet Union. Now, Kissinger really didn't care of what the consequences long-term would be of creating a massive movement of radicalized Muslims. The idea was they'll help to disassemble communism through non-cooperation and by whatever means, terrorism, you name it. He didn't care about that. The idea was to break up the Soviet Union, the banks could get back in there, and everybody's RSP would make more money. And people went along with this. They go along with pretty much whatever the State Department wants to do, whatever the leaders of the West want to do, because it's seen as being ultimately financially beneficial to us. If the United States is bombing 7 different countries, which they are right now, 7 different countries which have never attacked the United States, we can look at Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, whatever the 7 nations are. Nobody can tell you what they are in the United States. Nobody cares. If they're being bombed, it must be for a good reason. And good reason can only mean one thing. It must be financially beneficial to us. Okay, that's the human ego. All right, the ego values, you already heard this, the ego values money, it values property, values status, and it values empty gratification. Now, if you were to ask Henry Kissinger today, I think he's still alive, do you think it was good? Do you think it was great that you invented Islamic terrorism? Do you think it's good that you funded it and you trained it and you equipped them, you know? He'd say, absolutely it was. He'd be convinced that he was right. In 1980, when the communist nation of Afghanistan was having a revolution and the government was about to fall, the Soviets intervened and occupied Afghanistan. At that time, the same policy was used, but more aggressively. This time, Osama bin Laden, the bin Ladens, very close family associates of the Bush family going back generations, there was very few of them. It was Osama bin Laden and less than 10 other people. But through recruiting and funding, by the fact that all of these different tribes in Afghanistan were hostile towards each other and they're hostile towards the Russians, a huge movement, the Mujahideen was created with the CIA leading the way. Now everybody knows this and they see it as good. Kissinger would say it's good. A lot of Americans would say it was good. So as this developed, eventually the Russians were chased out. The political side of the Mujahideen became the Taliban, who ran the nation. The paramilitary side became Al-Qaeda. All right, funded, owned, operated, equipped by the CIA, by other nations, Saudi Arabia, Israel, all the ones that always work together. And this was seen as good. Okay, now, let's go to the Bush administration. Let's go to the Bush administration. Now, okay, let me tell you something you probably already know, and if you don't, you should. Everyone in the international security intelligence community understands that if you want to understand who it is that's responsible for doing something or making something happen, it's very easy to figure it out. All that you have to do is to figure out who benefited from it. Now, at that point, you can decide to prove it or not prove it. Maybe you can't prove it, but you'll know who did it. Always true, no exceptions. All right. Now, most American citizens, and I would agree with them, suspect that 9/11 was an inside job. Dick Cheney, who was the real power within the George W. Bush administration, benefited the most. Cheney wanted absolute power. He did. Everybody knows that. He wanted absolute power. He wanted the suspending of basic civil liberties within the United States through legislation like the Patriot Act. But there was no way to ever bring legislation like that to pass. It would be like Trump building a wall. You've got to have a villain first to justify this sort of thing, or it's impossible. You just don't even bother trying. You have to have a villain. Okay, if you're going to suspend civil liberties in the United States through the Patriot Act, you have to have a villain. Don't even try to bring in legislation like that unless you've got a darn good reason. Okay, Cheney also wanted to enrich himself financially and was heavily invested himself, career-wise, in the military-industrial complex, specifically Halliburton. You remember Halliburton. After the invasion of Iraq, Halliburton got the contract and they were paid billions of dollars to help rebuild Iraq. You remember Halliburton. Yeah, and you remember Dick Cheney. Okay, so let's see. Let's look at that for a second. None of that would have been possible without 9/11, but with 9/11, 9/11 allowed Dick Cheney to flood the military-industrial complex with unlimited money, trillions of dollars. Almost $2 trillion has been spent in Afghanistan, and Halliburton's still making a fortune, so is Dick Cheney to this day. Okay, what would you do for billions of dollars? All right, so 9/11 allowed him to flood the military-industrial complex with unlimited money. He enriched himself in ways that would make the worst of criminals blush with shame and disgust. But that was the kind of person he was. If you knew Dick Cheney, you'd know that's true. Cheney achieved every legislative objective, every geopolitical objective, every power objective, and every personal financial objective beyond his wildest dreams. He could not have done any of that without 9/11. All right? Anyone who has researched 9/11 at all, small details like earlier on that day when Dick Cheney gave the order to shut down the radar stations in the eastern United States, little details like that, you can pretty much see, any idiot could pretty much see the writing on the wall. Who benefited from it? My God, Dick Cheney benefited more from 9/11 than anybody's ever benefited from anything in 100 years. All of his dreams came true because of that one thing. What would you do to make all of your dreams come true? Add to that he's a selfish prick to start with. Okay, of course 9/11 was an inside job. All right, so now, what is the security intelligence world? Okay, in the United States, a tremendous amount of money goes into that. If you just look at the security intelligence money, the NSA, the CIA, all these different groups, military intelligence, that by itself would be the biggest intelligence agency conglomerate in history of the world. But after World War II, it became much bigger. something called the Five Eyes was developed. The Five Eyes was a 5 nations getting together to combine their security intelligence services together for their own reasons. Those 5 nations are the United States, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Okay, the Five Eyes. Any nation associated with the Five Eyes is very much involved with Islamic terror. Managing it, having created it, it has to be managed. After Iraq was conquered, a lot of people couldn't understand why the Bush administration simply dissolved the Iraqi military. The Iraqi military was over 1 million soldiers. Why were they simply dissolved? That creates a huge vacuum. Why not just reorganize them? If you create a vacuum, inevitably they're gonna end up doing something else because you've denied them a paycheck. Now, if you don't have a paycheck in a country without a social safety net, you starve, your family starves. What do? Oh, well, they had an idea for that. As that military broke up, this became the foundation of something called ISIS. All right, so ISIS is essentially the creation of that Bush administration. So under Reagan, we saw the creation of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. Through the Bush administration, we see the creation of ISIS. When under Obama, the United States decided to go into Syria, okay, what they were doing was they were working with fighting shoulder to shoulder with a group called al-Nusra, which is a branch of ISIS. These terrorists are manipulated and used in order to further American foreign policy, okay? So you have American soldiers, and I don't blame the soldiers, they didn't want to go there to fight with ISIS to destroy Syria, okay? But the banking industry, well, Saudi Arabia needed to put a pipeline through Syria. So Assad had to go. And when the banking industry calls, American military has to follow, because the banking industry, as I said, they have 100 times more influence than our elected officials. Why? Because people like the Koch brothers, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Bronfmans, they have a lot of money and they have far more influence in Washington than anybody else. And everybody with investments goes along with it. Even your RSP could be dependent, so people are very good at looking the other way, and we all have blood on our hands. There are no innocent people in this discussion, okay? Now, when I saw the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, I thought she did a great job. She's very compassionate, okay? But at the same time, let's not forget something, okay? New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes, okay? We've got United States, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. These 5 white nations who participated in funding. Our tax dollars go to all of this. Our tax dollars helped to create Al-Qaeda, create the Taliban, create ISIS, okay? If you're a member of the Five Eyes, you're soldiers, you know, Canadian soldiers in Iraq, Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan, Canadian soldiers in Libya. Our tax dollars going, our information goes through the Five Eyes. If the Five Eyes ask us to help destroy a telecom company called Huawei, we're happy to arrest whomever they want, have them extradited to the United States. The Chinese said of Canada, you're still the loyal dog of the United States. Wow, that's a painful insult, but I gotta say, it's true. I mean, we'll arrest whomever they want, extradite them wherever. If somebody ends up in Guantanamo Bay, we don't care, because Canadians participate in all aspects of this, and our tax dollars help to fund it. Torture continues to go on. The United Nations has established that torture has gone on. 69 people have been tortured in Afghanistan. Didn't make any difference that Obama signed an executive order banning torture. It still goes on. Donald Trump in the past couple of days has banned United Nations international court people from investigating this in the United States. He said they're trying to investigate us. I'm going to include a link to the video that talks about that, because that, that'll help. I don't want to have to describe everything. You've got to do a little research on your own. People are still tortured, and just so you know something for your own benefit, because this is just a footnote that you should know. When they're torturing somebody, for instance, if you're defending your farm in Afghanistan, they decide you're a terrorist. If you're defending your farm and they're torturing you, one of the things they do is not just waterboarding and all the other things, freezing you, do you have hypothermia? Yeah, they do all that. But one of the things they like to do is, because in the Muslim religion, they see anything homosexual as a bad thing. What they do to these guys is they rape them in a homosexual manner. So if you're a terrorist because you were defending your farm and an American didn't like it, you're now a terrorist. Doesn't matter, the hypocrisy of this is off the scale. You're the terrorist because you're defending your farm. So you're the terrorist. So now you're getting gangbanged by these operatives, because they know that'll destroy you mentally and emotionally because of your values and your culture. All of this is seen as good, fine, necessary, innocent, an appropriate response to anything that stands in the way of our investments. We have to look after the banking community because that's where our money is. We'll do whatever it takes. We'll divide, we'll conquer. We'll destroy nations all over the world. We'll destroy individuals. And the only measure of whether it's right or wrong is, did the stock market go up or did the stock market go down? Cheney would say that it went up. He went from being a millionaire to a billionaire. Well, that's the proof that it was the right thing to do. He would say, look, I defended my nation. I did what I thought was right. People benefited. I believe the world is more secure. And he believes that. I don't believe the world is more secure. I don't believe that. When people talk about this, they need to talk about it for what it is. I admire the fact that the Prime Minister of New Zealand has compassion, but why not talk about it for what it is? Okay, we need to talk about it for what it is. And I'm going to do that more in the next video. My name is Scott McGurn. Thank you for your time.